This is Karen Plater. Hey. And I'm the Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Plan Giving at the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and I'll be your host for today. I hope that you have all noticed the little chat box, because that's where you can type in questions as we go along, and I'll ask them to Lori at the breaks that she provides, or if she takes a breath, sometimes I squeeze a question in then as well. So according to my watch, it's 1:01, so I think I'm going to pass it over to Lori and let you begin. Oh,
all right.
Oh, wait a second. Lori was not the presenter. James, can you make Lori the presenter? I think I clicked on it by accident.
Can you hear me talking? That'll be a sign.
Yeah, we can hear you talking and we can see your screen. So I think that we're okay.
Excellent. Okay. So leaving a legacy to your church, talking about bequests. And January 23rd, 2019. Wow. It's that day. Okay. So I want to say thanks to the Presbyterian Church in Canada for organizing this and recording it. So it's not just now, it's something that you could go back to or someone else could go back to. And to all the people who've contributed to Presbyterian sharing. That's what makes this happen too. So this is me. Well, this isn't exactly me because right now I'm wearing a microphone on a headphone, but you get the idea. I know that some of the names look familiar. So I've introduced myself to some of you folks before. I am a kind of person who would study math and statistics and then theology, and more recently my Doctor of Ministry at Tyndale, where I did research into why Christians give money to their church. And that's something that still continues to fascinate me. If you wanted to know more about what I do, I've got a blog and lots of stuff on my website, which is lgreeser.com. What else did I say? I'm a consultant, I'm a speaker, a writer, a theologian, a poet. I'm a donor myself and a board member, formerly a pastor, and still currently a wife and a mom. And I'm sure that you people out there are juggling lots of hats too. That's just how life works. So as Karen said already, please type in your questions. I really thrive when people have comments, rebuttals, questions, concerns, joys, great examples. Oh, that reminds me of something that we did at my church. All of that kind of input is most welcome. So as Karen said, there'll be several question breaks during the presentation and again at the end. So please don't be shy. Type in your question. So here, if you remember nothing else from this little webinar, remember these 6 words, only 6. Remember the church in your will. There are 6 great words to put in your bulletin every Sunday. On the Presbyterian Church in Canada website, there's even quotes that you could use every week if you wanted to mix it up, some kind of a quote about generosity. But just a reminder to people that this is something they can do. I assure you from my work with healthcare and international development and other kinds of charities that there is no shortage of people reminding everyone about this to remember a charity in your will. So it needs to be something that people know. Oh yeah, I could leave money to my church too. It's not just a hospital thing. I always like to start off with stories. So we have a couple. I have one, Karen has one, and then we have a couple of stories that are based on real things that have happened that I have sort of made into the story of Peach Blossom. Peach Blossom is a fictional church that I have that, boy, they sure have a lot of stewardship activity going on there. So I'll start with a story that is a cautionary tale about why have a will. I guess the main question to think about about having a will is, do you trust the government to look after your estate? And if that answer to that is no, then you might want to think about having a will. So imagine, if you will, someone named Josh. Josh is studying engineering, and he's in his last year of engineering, and he has a tight group of friends. Now, Josh's mom shows up at his house one night, which is pretty unusual because Josh's mom lives 2 hours away. So this is quite unexpected. And he can tell by her face that something is wrong, and something is very wrong. His dad has suddenly passed away without any warning. Now, Josh's parents are divorced, and his dad lived on his own. The will that Josh's dad had made was 30 years out of date, and that's really painfully out of date. His spouse isn't his executor anymore because she's no longer his spouse. Now his executor is his estranged sister. His estranged sister lives overseas, and they haven't spoken. Josh and his dad hadn't spoken to his sister since their mother's death 20 years earlier, so it was not a close relationship by any means. Josh is the only child. He will inherit from his father, and this process will be painful, it will be complicated, it will be costly, and it will be slow. Josh will spend many hours contacting lawyers, hours that he would rather have been doing anything else, even studying physics. If it wasn't for the support of his friends, Josh would have lost the entire term. It was just so devastating to lose his dad and then to have all the additional mess of his dad's estate. And one thing Josh did, which is pretty unusual for a group of kids in their early 20s, but he tells his friends to go home and ask their parents if their wills are up to date, because he wouldn't wish this experience on anybody. As this story illustrates, making a will isn't about you'll be gone. It's about the people you care about. It's an act of kindness. And I advocate planned giving too, because a will is an opportunity to be not just kind to your family that you leave behind, but to the charity, to the church, to causes that you care about. And if you don't have kids, it's also important, and that's another story. But this story that I've just told you about Josh is based on a real story that was told to me by my kids. So go ask your parents, why would you have a will? That is one story. And I'm going to pass the microphone over to Karen, because she has a story about, well, why have a will? I have no kids.
Yeah, it was interesting. In the fall, my uncle passed away, and my uncle was a great man. He never married and didn't have any children, and he was a medical doctor. And so it fell to my father to figure out what to do with his estate. Unfortunately, no one could find a will. And so suddenly we realized that things are out of your hands and out of your control. So because my uncle lived in Newfoundland, only somebody who was resident in Newfoundland could be appointed the administrator of the estate. So it went to the public trustee, and that's who gets to decide what happens with the things in his house, what happens with the estate, and how it's distributed. Of course, it has to be done according to the law, and so normally it would go to the siblings, because the parents have passed away. So there's my father, and then a sister who's passed away, so it'll pass on to her 3 children. But the interesting thing is that my uncle was really known for his generosity, both to the church and to the hospital where he worked. And so there's no provision without a will to give anything to those that he supported so well in his life and was well known for. So I think it becomes a question, and it certainly had me thinking, oh, what am I doing with my estate? Who's going to know what to do if something happens to me, because I don't have any kids either? And I think it's just really important. Let your family, let your friends know that you have a will and that there's an executor, and make sure there's an executor who knows, okay, if something happens to you, that this is where the will is and where it's kept so that it could be accessible.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, the cautionary tales do give us pause. The stats that I'm familiar with is that about 50% of Canadians don't have a will. So that is a bit sobering. My next story is a slide that I just added. I talked about this before, so I won't talk about it too much. I talked about this in a previous webinar, but I wanted to give a joyous story too. And that's a story of a woman who passed away at my church and left a modest bequest to the church, but it was a big sum of money to her, and it's terribly encouraging. And part of the money, half of it we gave to causes that she supports. If it had been Karen's uncle, you could see the money going to, say, a hospital and to the church. We gave it to 2 causes very important to this woman, and another part of the funds is going to be used to set up a fund so that any child from our church can go to camp, and they can apply for a bursary for a certain amount of money to help them go to camp. And there was so much joy and so many happy faces when this was announced that it's just a great story. And I'm smiling. You can't see it now, but I'm smiling as I think about how happy this woman would be. She loved kids, knowing that this is what the church is doing with her gift. And at some level out there, she does know. And when we do these great things when we celebrate the generosity of people who've made a bequest, that is, of course, the very best way to encourage people to do the same. So I want to tell you another story. It's about Peach Blossom, but it's totally based on donors and events in my work in fundraising and stewardship. So Peach Blossom is a pretend church, but imagine that it's your church or a church that you know. So Mrs. Lester had passed away, and she gave a bequest to Peach Blossom. And to celebrate, Peach Blossom hosted a luncheon. They did it on a Saturday so people could come. Mrs. Lester's son, who lives a bit away, he was able to come, and they invited that entire church. Now, Mrs. Lester was famous for her chocolate chip cookies. She taught Sunday school for many years and potlucks at church events. She was really famous for her chocolate chip cookies. So they were sure to have chocolate chip cookies at this service and then at the celebration. And after lunch, they had a program celebrating the bequest. What it was, showing people, like literally showing people with slides like we're doing here, about what great things are going to happen with the bequest. They started out before that with a couple of young adults who had been Mrs. Lester's Sunday school students back a few years earlier, and they just shared how grateful they were to have known Mrs. Lester and how kind she was. And the Lester's son, Michael, spoke too, and there was nieces and nephews and talking about how their aunt and uncle had always been kind to them. And they also prayed, and the son spoke. It was hard. They asked if he wanted to do it because, it's mom, talking about his late mom, it was a difficult thing, but he did. And he was so grateful to meet people that cared about his mom and knew his mom in different ways than he did. And he was really grateful for the church too, which has meant so much to his mom and to his dad, who had passed away some years before. And to get started, they sang Mrs. Lester's favorite hymn, which is "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." And if you knew Mrs. Lester, you'd know that she loved that song and that she didn't always get those high notes quite right, but that the joy in singing that song, was evident. So the stewardship and finance team at the church put together a little slideshow to say, Mrs. Lester left a bequest, and of course it was acknowledging Mr. Lester as well, and this is what we're going to do with that money. One of the things that they had decided to do was get a van for the church. The church has a lot of programs going on, and they thought about this long and hard because, of course, they're going to have to pay for insurance and gas and all of those things for this van. But they really thought that it would be a great benefit to the church. And they also included a picture of Lucy, who lives nearby but can't walk far and doesn't drive. And she would be one of the first people to be really happy about the van and help her get to church and to the church program. And she was really excited. Another thing that the Peach Blossom did with this bequest was gave money for a chaplaincy program at the local nursing home. They do have a chaplain who's very part-time, and they wanted to expand this program. The reason, the connection there was that Mr. Lester lived at this nursing home in his last years. And so they really felt it would be great to be able to expand that ministry. So the chaplain from the nursing home came, Sarah is her name, and she talked about Mr. Lester because the request was also from him. And what was really interesting and that people didn't really know is that an old pastor, a previous pastor from Peach Blossom, was now living in the nursing home. And so this bequest was also going to benefit him. And that just made everyone smile because it was just such one of those lovely God coincidences that this was helping. So they were able to celebrate this ministry that was going to be helping all kinds of people, not just people from the church, all kinds of people in the community, and that will benefit because of the pastoral care funded by this bequest. And one of those God moments that Pastor Jerry is also living at the nursing home now is just serendipity. And people just really felt strongly that it was just one more sign of how the Lesters would be very pleased with how their donation was being used. Now, they also invited Aaron from the denomination, from Peach Blossom's denomination, to this event because some of the money would be going to the national church. It was going to be used to support mission workers here in Canada. And it was also going to fund schools and refugee camps run by denominational partners overseas. Now, I got to be honest with you, there was definitely people at Peach Blossom who did not know that their denomination supported mission workers here in Canada, or that their denomination helped to fund schools and refugee camps. So it was a great opportunity to just tell those stories. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and Erin certainly had pictures of this. In fact, Erin stayed over this was Saturday, Erin stayed over and preached at Peach Blossom on Sunday. So that was a great opportunity to strengthen that connection between Peach Blossom and the National Church. So the bequest celebration is honoring Mrs. Lester's generosity and Mr. Lester's generosity. And it might sound morbid or a bit scary to you to say, oh, but they're dead and this is about a bequest. But it wasn't like that. It was a really warm event, and people who cared about Mr. and Mrs. Lester, their family and their friends, it warmed their heart to know that this bequest was going to help people, and for them to be able to actually see what was going to happen, it just warmed their heart. It was a lovely event. It was really great for Mrs. Lester's extended family, and it helped people from Peach Blossom too to get an idea of what would happen. Especially that Mrs. Lester had been a Sunday school teacher, the idea of helping refugee kids go to school it really just seemed to be a very good fit. And at an event like this, we have to remember too that not everybody goes to church. Not everybody in Mrs. Lester's family went to church. So this event, both her funeral and then this celebration later about her bequest, it was really a demonstration of what a community of Christ looks like, what a generous community of Christ looks like. So think of it as a very important event, as celebrating generosity and as a witness about what church is like. So it wasn't a very long program, but people stayed and talked. They had to make more coffee. The lawyers and the financial professionals that had been involved in setting up this bequest had also been invited, and they came. It was very helpful for the people from the church to chat with them. Even Aaron from the denomination left with some business cards in his pocket. So it was really making a lot of connections, and it was a lovely event. And as I'm telling you this story, I can see in my mind an event that I'm partly basing this story on, and it really was a lovely event. People lingered. And as I said, all kinds of people in the church came. Mrs. Alton came. Mrs. Alton isn't in her first childhood anymore. She and Mrs. Lester had been friends for many decades, and she thoroughly enjoyed this event. Not only that, I'm quite sure that there is another bequest to Peach Blossom coming in the future. We don't know when. Celebrating generosity is one of the best stewardship sermons around. I would say probably it is one of the best stewardship sermons that I can imagine. So that was a lot from me, a long monologue from Lori. So please type in your questions, concerns, doubts, joys. I'll take it all. And Karen, we have this great gig, Karen and I, where she reads out the questions and I answer. And if I can't answer, then I also ask Karen, and maybe I ask her first. So is there anything you want to ask?
So you have to stop talking so I can ask a question. It's Karen. So we have a couple of questions that I'll go through, but I'll just make a comment before I do that I've been at congregations before who've done the celebration of the bequest right in the church service, and they've invited the family members to come to the church service, both when they're receiving the bequest, and they'll do exactly what you've talked about, share the story of the person who gave the bequest and where the money's going and what impact it will have, and it's a great celebration. And they work it right into the worship service. So it's really nice. The other one I've seen is a congregation on All Saints Day. They will remember people who've given bequests in the past, and they may even invite family members who've done that. You know, like if they gave a bequest 5 years ago or left a legacy to the church, they'll be saying, look, they'll let the family know, we're going to remember your loved one in our church service this time and celebrate the bequest once again. And sometimes they may join and sometimes they don't. But again, as you said, it's a witness to the family and to the community that the church is remembering the legacy that these saints have left. All right, so I've got some questions here. One is, can you indicate in your will that the church should receive a non-specific amount comprised of any leftover assets of your estate after any fees and taxes and maybe amounts left to your family have been given?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to have some details of that coming on. And not only that, but all of this exists in print and it's available to you in your congregation. So a big yes, there's multiple ways to give. And not only that, we have some materials for you to explain that to your congregation.
Wonderful. Somebody else wants to know, how do you acknowledge anonymous donors?
I think you talk about the legacy of the saints and you say it was Mrs. Lester and Mrs. Alton, and we want to include the many people who have chosen to remain anonymous. We are grateful for them as well. And it's also a time where you can remember the history of your church and go back and say, we're benefiting from the legacy of saints going, in some churches it goes back for a very long time. So there's a lot of ways to acknowledge, anonymous and also the history of people that are, no longer with us that we want to remember.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you could do it in much the same way that you could, if a bequest came in, you could say, we've had a generous bequest from someone who likes to remain anonymous. And then you could just share what the impact of the bequest would have.
Yes.
Another question is it preferable to tell the church when you've decided to include the church in your will?
Yes, I think that's going to depend on the church. I wish there was a clear, if you think it would encourage the church to let them know, imagine if I was the pastor of a church, I would be encouraged to know that.
Yeah, good. Okay, that's all the typing questions we have right now. So we'll let you go on and I'll continue to monitor them for you.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I'll try to take longer breaths.
No worries.
This picture is a rainbow. And the rainbow is there for you to sort of imagine and say, well, what if someone left $1 million bequest to my church? What would we do? And I want to encourage you to dream that dream and to have that vision, because the money follows vision. If people aren't going to leave a gift to your church if what they think you're going to do is have a big old fight. So having an idea of what your church would do with a bequest is a really valuable thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to do. I already talked about the summer camp one, so I'll skip right over that one. The first thing to do when we're dreaming our dreams about what a bequest could look like, or how we would talk about plan giving. Plan giving is like leaving a gift in your will, having a bit of a plan for what we're going to do. The first thing we do, the first seed, is do you yourself have a will in place? Because it's really hard to talk about wills and estates if we haven't done it ourselves, if we haven't actually done what it is we're asking other people to do. So I'm encouraging us to not skip this step. And there are people that you could get to help you, so you don't have to, you don't have to do this cold. But the leading by example is just such an excellent way to start. I have definitely been in situations where I could tell that the people that I was working with did not have a will and were so uncomfortable, and it just made it like it just made it very, very difficult to talk about this if the people in charge didn't have a will. So I would really encourage us to lead by example and have a will in place. And I'm not just saying that to make the process of talking about legacy giving easier. It's a gift to the people that you care about in your life. It's a gift to yourself. So do not skip this step. I encourage you. And then we have the seedling growing. And do people know that they can leave a bequest to your church? I always tell pastors doing hospital visits to, every hospital has a wall that lists donors. And I always encourage pastors, maybe on their way out, to stop and just have a little look at their wall, at that wall. You'd be surprised. So do people know that they can leave a bequest to your church? Do they know what a bequest is? Do you? So it's just really, this is the basics of starting anything, is to know what it is that, what are we doing? What is a bequest? A bequest is a gift to the church in your will. And there's multiple ways of doing it, and we'll get into some of those mechanics and some of those practical details. But a little reading, a little webinars can go, that's how we start. So I encourage, I appreciate you all that you're taking this step of coming to this webinar and seeing what this is about. So one easy way that you could do this is ask someone. You could ask me, you could ask someone from the Presbyterian Church in Canada to come do a planned giving workshop at your church. We could have tea, we could tell stories, we could talk about death and taxes, but even more so, we could talk about kindness and leaving a legacy and what matters to you in life and how you want that to continue when you're not here. It's a lasting act of kindness. Now, does your church have a bequest policy? That means if you got a bequest gift, what would you do? And we can always fight about the money later is not a bequest policy. We are not so very far off from Christmas, so maybe if we close our eyes and listen carefully, we can still hear the angels telling us not to be afraid, that we can do hard things like have a bequest policy. Do you celebrate bequests and memorial gifts every year? And as we've talked about, the celebration is such a wonderful way to acknowledge the legacy of saints. Karen said the legacy of saints, and I really like that phrase. It could be on a Memorial Sunday or Eternity Sunday to talk about people who have left that kind of a legacy to our church, and to say thank you and appreciate it. And say what difference acknowledge what kind of difference that's making to the life of our congregation. Does your church nurture generosity in all of life, including legacy giving? And that's something, I mean, if you've been to some of these webinars before, talking about how we acknowledge the offering and worship, different ways that we can make our budget tell the story of God at work in our congregation, all sorts of things, but and including legacy giving is part of. It's not just about money. In fact, money is maybe just an offshoot. It's about discipleship. Giving is a spiritual discipline. It's a discipleship question. So when we encourage people to be generous disciples of Christ in all their life, so legacy giving would be part of that. Is part of that. And I encourage us to think about giving at all ages and stages, because people don't magically become givers at a certain age. I get that question a lot. People say, well, younger people don't give at our church, but maybe once they turn 60, they will. And there's no magic that happens with a certain birthday. It's something that we have to encourage. It's something that we have to teach. All right. Well, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I've got some questions for you. So, do you have any advice on frameworks for making the case for bequests?
Celebrating them is the easiest, because it's a great chance to say what you would do. Make sure, if you want to make a case for a bequest, that you have a bequest policy so that people would know what would happen with the bequest. If the bequest just means that no one is going to have to, that current members are not going to have to give to support the church, that's not a very compelling case for support. So a vision of what God would do if you had an extra $200,000 at your church could be, if people gave much above budget, that would be the same case as for a bequest. If our church had an extra 200,000 or 500,000 or $1 million, this is what we sense God is calling us to do with that kind of money. Does that help?
Yeah, and I would agree. I think that your case for bequest, there are two ways. One, you already make one as an example by what you've done with bequests that you've already received. So that's tied into the celebrating the bequests and letting people know the impact that they had. And then the other is letting them know your vision for what you'd like to do. And that way people can really share in and think, oh, I can't give now, but if I left some money, that would help them do it later. And they can see the vision for where the church is going.
Yes.
All right.
Go ahead, Karen.
Yep, I just was going to say the next one is, how do we gracefully handle the issue of very specific designated bequest, such as new choir gowns or an organ, etc.?
Sigh. I think you want to encourage people to make their request open. I mean, if you have, that's different. That goes back to the bequest policy. If you already had designated funds, if you had, say, a designated endowment fund or a fund for capital improvements or for your building, or you had a mission fund, that's one thing. But if people are making such a specific bequest, and that's not something that that gets awkward. You can go back to the people, if there are relatives that are still around, and say, we so appreciate your generosity, and we understand that, at the moment that Aunt Hilda made this will that we had a choir, but we don't have a choir now. So we were wondering if you would be, open to changing that designation a bit so that it supports Sunday school or, some other kind of need at the church. You can go back and ask to get that designation changed. Starting by acknowledging that you're grateful for their generosity and that the circumstances have changed. I mean, everyone wants their gift to be useful and appreciated. So in that spirit, have a conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Education now is the key for when people are writing their wills, to help them see, what can limitations do for the church? And you can kind of give examples like, if we had a bequest made for the marching band and we don't have a marching band anymore, it ties our hands. So education really helps. But then once it's already made and the will's done and people are gone, it becomes much more tricky. So yeah, having that vision for where bequests will go and sharing it and helping people to see the sort of legacy they want to leave, I think that's absolutely key too. Yeah. Okay, no other questions, so we'll let you keep going.
Okay, I just thought of a poem. This is balancing out that also sometimes we want to make our gifts while we're here. And the poem is, do your giving while you're living so you're knowing where it's going. I mean, that doesn't always work out, but it can be something to think about too, is that, what's the balance between being generous now and being generous later? Wouldn't it be great if there was legacy giving materials for people in my congregation? Say a series of colorful bulletin inserts or one-page handouts to explain what leaving a legacy to your church means. And you know where this is going, don't you? On the Presbyterian website, under planned giving and ways to give, there is a series of handouts, and there's 5 of them, and I've got the 5 covers here. So you can see there's a blue one which talks about a legacy in your will, and it explains what a bequest is, and that you can support your congregation, that you can support the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and of course other causes, and save taxes. That's very important to know. A charitable gift I can't even say it. A charitable gift annuity is something that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. That's a more specialized form of giving where the donor will continue to get some income while leaving. It's sort of like the donor gives the hen to the church and continues to get eggs while they're alive. I'll explain it that way. Life insurance is another way to give, so that you give the policy to the church, to the charity, to the national church, and then when you pass away, the life insurance policy, the beneficiary is the charity or the church. And
I'll just throw in, while you're looking to the next one, that they can order these brochures free of charge. So feel free to order them for members of your congregation. throw them in your bulletin, put them back at the church. They're all printed and they look pretty.
Yes, by all means, please order them. And when you print up your bulletin, you remember the plan, remember the church in your will and put these inserts in and have them around. Yes, please order them. So the red one there is about life beneficiary gifts. You can make the church a beneficiary of your RSP or other kinds of assets you might have. And again, it's the same way that when you leave a gift to a charity or a church in your will, it reduces the amount of tax that your estate has to pay. And then publicly traded securities, that would be like stocks. That's what we normally call them. Like you own stocks in General Electric or Defasco or whatever it is. You can give stocks either in your will or while you're around. And that's something that I want to talk about a little more because I am sort of fanatical about this because it's an amazing way to give. And I don't think enough people take advantage of it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know if you leave, when you have a will and somebody's left the gift to the charity, if you actually give the gifts of stock as an in-kind gift to the charity, you don't have to pay taxes on capital gain. So it's a great way to not only fulfill their wish to give something to the church, but then for the whole estate to save on taxes. So it's kind of neat that way.
It's amazing, and and when I do explain to people, they're like, "Really, this is legal?" It's like, yeah, it is. It almost sounds too good to be true. So I've put the link to the website on here, and I really write this down, email it to yourself, bookmark it, Google Keep It, because this is where all these resources live, and you can get all these bulletin inserts that we've outlined here. Plus, there's a really detailed guide, an up-to-date guide on how to set up a legacy fund and endowment in your church. And then there's information sheets, so a little bit more detail than just the bulletin insert on some of these different ways to give. So I really strongly encourage you to check these out. Like Karen said, you can they will send you these lovely bulletin inserts, and this is just an easy and excellent way to get this discussion started. So before we look at some of these ways to give in a little bit more detail, are there any questions?
I don't see any new questions yet, but I'm sure if you keep talking, they'll start popping up again. Okay,
I can keep talking. So this is looking at what this one of these actually says, a charitable bequest. Let's start with that. It's a direction in the will that leaves one or more assets in your estate to a charity. And it's, as we've said, a meaningful way to support your congregation, to support the Presbyterian Church in Canada and other causes that you care about. And it also saves tax for your estate. I had a conversation a few months ago with someone who said that they were their mother-in-law's executor, and they had no idea that their mother-in-law was sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in RSP. And when she passed away, 50% of that was paid in tax. And she said her mother-in-law would just have been horrified. Like she loved her church, and if she could have, left some of that money to her church and then and paid less tax, I mean, she would have been so delighted. But they just had no idea. So it's so important to have these conversations on this side of the ground.
Yeah, the one thing is that with RRSPs, you still have to pay tax on them. But you can leave things to the church which will help offset the taxes.
Yes. Sorry. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, it's a reduction in tax. Yeah. So you can make different ways to different assets to make a gift. You could give cash. You could give stock. You could give specific things. And this question came up earlier. You could give a specific amount to the church. You could give a percentage, or you could give what's called the residue. So after everything else has been cleared from your estate, after the debts and any other costs have been settled, you could say the residue goes to goes to the church or whatever charity you choose. So there's really a lot of different ways to do this. And this little handout here that can go in the bulletin, gives some basic guidelines for this, how it can be done. So you could add it to your will, when you write your will, or you can make it sort of a little codicil and add it on. And then on the second last line here, it says, gifts should be unrestricted or as broad as possible. And that's the way that they have the greatest impact. And that's something that we need to understand how that works, so that we can say, you know, if to have the best impact, to have the most impact with your gift, please, you know, leave it unrestricted, so that as the ministry circumstances at that time dictate, that your money can go to the best use. And I want to emphasize here that the PCC, the Stewardship Office, Karen and Jim and staff there can help you with this.
Here's a question, Lori. Have you ever heard of an instance when a will was challenged? What does a church do then?
Hire a lawyer. Yeah, you would talk to the national church, and yeah, I mean, the more that you can show, like the more, here this would be great when you think about the previous question, should you tell your church if you've made a gift in your will? Here's another reason why the answer to that question should be yes. So it's not even a surprise, so that you can say, yes, yeah, I went out for tea with Mrs. Lester, and she was so delighted to tell me that she was going to help the church in her will. And that would actually be an important kind of, I don't want to call it an audit trail, but that would help.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I have answered this question sometimes for congregations who've been struggling with this, because on the one hand, they want to be nice and they want to people to see a Christian response. And at the same time, they're like, oh, but actually, I do know that so-and-so did leave this in their will and they wanted it to go to the church. And sometimes family members or friends won't understand why a portion of the estate or the residual should go to the church. So I think it is important that the church is honoring the will, but it's another reason why we say don't only inform the church about what you're doing in your will, but it's good if you're leaving gifts to the church or other charities that you let your family and executors know and know why it's important to you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's an ongoing conversation, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Oh, and I think this example will help here address some of the questions that have come up too. It's and this is in the bulletin insert, so you're hearing it now, but you can have this, you can have a copy of this. So when Grace and George married, they made a will to distribute their assets when they die, and they decided to leave a gift of $50,000 to their congregation. But as their family grew, they thought, they changed their will so that the gift was a percentage rather than a specific amount. And that makes sense too. And in either case, they know that their estate will provide for the people and for the church that they love. So that just shows that there's more than one way to give, and some of the options are. And it can cost less than you think. That's the other paragraph there. I mean, the receipt from a bequest can reduce the taxes owing. And that gets complicated because tax rates are different in every province, and it depends what it is that's being taxed. So the details are best left for a financial professional, but I think the take home is that it can cost less than you think, and it can reduce the amount of tax that you have to pay.
Yeah, I was asked once, Lori, at a presentation, whether or not it's better to leave a specific amount or to leave a percent. And I said, it really depends on the person and what their circumstances are. The questioner was wondering, when there's a percent left, it takes longer for the will to be sorted out. Whereas if it's at a certain amount, they know, oh, okay, we transfer a certain amount. But I think especially with people who have like real estate or houses that appreciated in value, it can be very worth it to leave 1 or 2% of a house in your estate to the church, and it can be worth the wait. So I think it really depends on the giver's circumstances and what they're trying to achieve with their will.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm reading from the bulletin insert, and I've circled it in red. the benefits. Support transformational ministry far into the future. And make a gift of any size. Your present income will not decrease. You can change it. You can reduce tax. You can live generously, and and your legacy can be generosity as well. Something is important to you now. It can continue to be important. Questions?
No, I guess I've been asking them as we've gone around, so we don't have any more right now.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Is there a delicate way to broach this subject with somebody who is terminally ill? Ooh, that's a good one.
Oh boy. That is a really difficult question to answer in the abstract. I think it speaks to, if the pastor knew how much that person gave already, wouldn't that be helpful? Because then you wouldn't be going into this discussion cold, and you could take the opportunity to thank them for their generosity to the church. If that's all you did, that would be a meaningful conversation. Now that I think about it, that's what I would do. Is I would find out get some measure of what their generosity to the church has been, and thank them. And then you would know, I think, guided by the Spirit, whether you were going to ask.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a really delicate subtopic. And I think anything where it seems as if a church or a congregation is pressuring someone to give is never a good thing. And we want to make sure that's not what we're doing when we're encouraging people to give annual gifts or give anything. So I think it's, but I think for people to know that it's something the church does, if it's a continual message you're doing, then you don't have to broach it when they're terminally ill, but they might broach it with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the words legacy of saints and ongoing conversation have come up a whole bunch of times in this webinar. So I think the more that this isn't the first time that you talk about it, the better. Okay, publicly traded securities. That's like stocks or shares. You might say you own shares in a company, or you own stocks in a company. And this one's talking about shares, bonds, mutual funds. When you donate those, you don't pay tax on the capital gain. And this is just like magic. It's the charity gets more money, you pay less tax, and it's just kind of magical. And I don't know how to explain it better without getting into the actual numbers, but donating stocks is just amazing. All right, so this is again from the bulletin insert, and it's talking about, well, how do I actually do this? And there's actually a form. If you look at the bottom on the website, there's a form, or Karen or Jim could send you one, and you give that form to your broker and say, I would like these stocks to go to, and then the PCC will if the money is going to them, then that's the end. Or if the money is going to your church, they will be the intermediary.
Exactly, because a lot of congregations don't have their own stockbroker. You can always donate it directly to the congregation if they have the ability to handle it. But because so many of our congregations are small, the PCC will handle gift of securities on behalf of your congregation. And the only fees that are charged are the stockbroker fees. There's no charge from the national office for handling those.
So I think that's the main thing I want to say about this is just what Karen has said, is that the PCC can help you with this. If they can pass the funds on to your church. And of course, if you wanted to donate stocks to the PCC, they're all set up to do that. Now, do you see my little slide here with arrows that says amazing and a red circle and a yellow circle? Let's put on our arithmetic hat, shall we, and sharpen our pencils. So Alan wishes to make a gift of $50,000 to support Presbyterian sharing, or to support St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, or whatever it is. And so this is going to show the difference between if he sells the shares and then makes a donation, or if he donates the shares directly. Are you with me so far? This is one where I really wish I could see your whether you're glazing over or not. But let's start with value of shares. So number one, so if he sells the shares, they're worth $50,000. Now say, and that doesn't change. $50,000 worth of shares is always worth $50,000, but he originally paid $20,000 for those shares. So those shares have a capital gain. That is to say that they're worth more. Line 3 there, they've gained $30,000. So that's amazing. He's made a lot of money on those shares, and the government would like to get in on some of that because that's income. He's realized a gain of $30,000 on those shares. So when he sells those shares, if he was to sell them instead of donate them, so the first column, if he was to sell those shares, he would pay tax of $15,000. If he donates those shares, he pays tax of $0. So that's a big difference right there. So he gets a tax credit depending, this is again depending on where you live. It's different in Alberta, it's different in Ontario, it's different if you're a millionaire versus if you're not. But roughly he would get a donation tax credit of $23,000. But if he donates the shares directly, he doesn't have to pay that capital gain, so his tax is much reduced. So
Laurie, this is where I say that there's an error on this brochure. The $15,000 is the taxable gain. So it's not the taxes that they pay. The taxes is the $6,900. And yeah, so the taxable gain. So you only pay, the capital gain is $30,000. And you pay tax on 50% of the capital gain. So that's why the taxable gain is $15,000. And then the tax on the taxable gain, which is line 4, is times by 46%. So that's $6,900. So that's just a note that we'll be updating this brochure very shortly.
All right, you're right. Good catch, Karen. Yes. So I guess what to say is that you save tax. That we haven't documented it correctly here, but you save tax by donating the shares directly. And not only that, but the charity can actually overall get more depending on, in this example, he's paying the tax and still giving the proceeds, but many people would just subtract the tax from their gift. So the charity usually comes out ahead if you donate the stocks to them directly. And you come out ahead because you don't have to pay tax on the capital gains. So this same example is it's just looking at the yellow, you can just see that you pay less tax. The green, you pay less tax, you pay no tax, in fact, when you donate the shares, whereas you pay tax if you sell them and then donate the proceeds. Is that as clear as mud? Save tax, donate the shares directly.
Yeah, that's good. And this second slide has been fixed, so that's better. Yep.
So the benefits of donating stock. Know that you're supporting transformational ministry, and that's a story that we need to keep telling about our organization, about our church, about our charity all the time. So it's a very cost-effective way to give. There's very significant tax savings. You can leave a legacy during your lifetime and through your estate, or through your estate, you could do both. Questions, comments, joys, concerns?
Nothing right now. We've been having good dialogue as we go along.
Okay.
One person had to leave, and she says, "Oh, thanks so much for sharing this information." So she found it helpful so far.
Oh, that's excellent. It's very kind of her to say that too. So again, please save this address because this is where all these resources live on the internet. And last but not least, if you look on that link, you will find legacy giving materials for 2018. And you say, but Laurie, it's 2019. And I just wanted to let you know that worship resources are not like yogurt. They don't have a best buy date, and you can use them in 2019. It will be fine. So there's readings, there's stories from other PCC congregations, and I Karen and I worked on these materials together, and I'm really pleased with the stories that we're able to share with you there. So there's children's time, there's liturgy, there's sermon, it's all there. So, you know, in the spirit of trying to make it easy to talk about legacy giving, this is it.
I love the image that we used in this Legacy Giving Sunday materials, because it talked about light and shining your light. So just as Christ encouraged us to shine our light now, a legacy giving can be a way of shining our light from the past. And so it uses the image of stars. When we look at stars, we see light from the past today. And so that's kind of like a bequest, a way for us to see light from the past today. So I think it's just such a great illustration for legacy giving, and I encourage you to take it away and have as much fun with it as you can.
Yes, and I think, you know, now that we're talking about this, you could even, if you were trying to do a bequest where you want to celebrate the stars from the past that are still, where their light is still shining, you could adapt this to have sort of a bequest celebration as well.
Here's a question that's popped up. Is there ever a reason to give one kind of asset to the church and a different kind of asset to family?
Oh boy, that's a question for a financial planner, I think, because that really depends on what your tax situation is, and yeah. So I can't answer that one in the abstract. Do you have any thoughts, Karen?
Well, I just would say yes, there may be. So talk to your financial planner. There can be lots of in and outs for estates, and you may think, oh, this is a way that I can give something to the church that my family won't miss, or will sort of know that that is good. You want to just make things as clear and as easy as possible for your executor, and then also for ways that is best for your estate and your circumstances. So yeah, that's a great question, and when you're talking to your financial advisor, ask them that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, I've had another thanks. Thanks so much for this very supportive session.
Oh, you're most welcome. I have such great admiration for the work that all the clergy are doing out, you know, it can be kind of a lonely job. So please soak up as much encouragement as we can send your way.
All right, that's all the questions I have, and we're at 2 minutes to 2.
Wow. Go us. Well, I'll go on to the contact slide then. This is how to contact me and how to contact Karen and Jim.
Great. There's another thanks. Thank you. This has been very helpful. And both of those I know are out from British Columbia. So there you go, Lori.
Excellent.
All right. Okay. Thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you, Lori, and thank you for all the participants. And for all of those who are watching online later, I hope that you found it informative. Feel free to pick up the phone or write me an email, and I'm happy to talk about circumstances for your congregation and how you could implement this there. Okay. Bye.
Bye.